is Allison. I'm a Writing Center tutor at San Jose State University's Writing Center. And today we're going to be talking about how to identify racist and biased language in writing. Racism is an ongoing issue that has been around for many years, and style books like the APA or MLA manual may address avoiding bias and stereotyping in writing. However, they don't go into depth as to what constitutes as racist language specifically. Therefore, the purpose of today's video is to address these common writing mistakes when discussing race-related topics. Also keep in mind that we're talking about this topic from a United States point of view. And also keep in mind that it's totally okay if you're not familiar with some of these topics. We're here to learn and improve ourselves as writers, as well as just improving ourselves in general. We are going to cover strategies on how to recognize language that may be considered racist, biased, or microaggressive. Also, we want to strive to write from an anti-racist perspective, so that way we can be more inclusive and considerate, as well as being more accurate and precise. We can first begin by going over some useful definitions and defining what exactly racism is and what anti-racism is. So racism can be defined as individual and societal discrimination against a certain group of people based on their race who have relatively little social power. This is present in the actions of individuals, cultural norms, values, institutional structures, and/or systems that benefit one race over others. Anti-racism, however, is the act of working against racial hatred, bias, systemic racism, and the oppression of marginalized groups. This is structured around conscious efforts and deliberate actions to provide equitable opportunities for all people on an individual and systemic level. We also want to focus on writing from this perspective. So moving on to recognizing assumptions and biases in writing. While writing, you want to avoid anything that might be interpreted as discriminatory, and we'll go over a few examples of how you might come across this. So when we recognize our own assumptions and biases, we want to make sure that we're not projecting any inaccurate perceptions of others. We might assume that others are less complex than ourselves, so double check your work to ensure that you're not doing this. Also, before we get into the examples, I just want to make a disclaimer that the Writing Center does not condone any of the following statements to come. These are merely to be seen as examples, and they are to be seen as inappropriate. Our first example is Europeans discovered the Americas. So this statement does not acknowledge the indigenous people that lived in these areas before the Europeans arrived. And we can identify this as explicit bias, which is intentional or unintentional use of language to indicate favor to a person or group that is known and recognized. In this statement, we can see this because we're favoring the Europeans here, giving them credit for discovering the Americas when indeed they weren't the first people to discover it, right? Indigenous people lived here, occupied these areas, and had lives for themselves. So we want to avoid this kind of language when speaking on this topic or topics similar to this. Our next example states Martin Luther King Jr. was different from other members of the Black community. This statement is insensitive because it implies that MLK Jr. was an exception of the Black community and other members are not as impressive, which is false. We can identify this as an implicit bias, which is similar to explicit bias. However, these biases are more subtle and may often run contrary to outwardly expressed opinions and beliefs. So someone may say this thinking that they're perhaps giving a compliment to MLK Jr. However, because we're saying like he's different from other people in the Black community, then this is what makes it offensive. Example 3 states Asians are the modeled minority group because they are business minded. Again, similar to the other example that we just looked at, this may seem like a compliment, but just the idea of a modeled minority is offensive because it implies that there are some groups that are better than others, which is not true, right? So we can classify this as a stereotype, which is preconceived and generalized beliefs about an entire group of people that lump them together and ignore individual differences. So saying that this group is better than this group is better than all the other groups, right? We're stereotyping them, saying that this one's good, this one isn't. Our last example states institutional racism doesn't exist. Now, this statement can be harmful because it dismisses the fact that racism is a lived experience. We can see institutional racism in examples of Black individuals interacting with police or looking for employment opportunities. We can classify this statement as a microaggression, which is defined as interactions where something is said or done, intended or unintended, that causes hurt to the person the words or actions are directed at. So, again, similar to implicit bias, we may see that someone may not mean to cause hurt to someone, but by saying a statement like this and not understanding the full scope of what institutional racism is, they can really cause harm to certain individuals. I just want to wrap this video up by saying that this video is to act as a stepping stone towards becoming a better ally in our writing. Therefore, the most important thing to take away from this video is to have empathy for others. We want to be aware of other people's experiences and understand that those experiences are valid and worthy. We also want to make sure to be an active listener to those around you who come from different backgrounds and experiences, because we can all learn from each other. By understanding the definitions discussed and recognizing these mentioned issues, we can make sure that our writing incorporates these anti-racist values. If you would like to continue to learn more about this topic, you can visit the SJSU Writing Center Homegrown Handouts and take a look at our handout titled Approaching Writing with an Anti-Racist Perspective. Here's my references. Thank you so much for watching. Again, if you would like to learn more about this topic, you can visit our website, sjsu.edu/writing center. You can also take a look at some of our social medias, which discusses some writing related topics. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful and have a nice day.